Okay, start a new one. Um, can you hear these guys? Oh my God. Jeez. Is it? It's 12 p.m. and um, that's it. Just starting a new one of these. Hang it up. That's not good, man. Not correct. No. Especially since it's actually, well, it's actually better than that's actually in progress again. Or a lot. Or as it could be almost. Reaction. Release on that thing. This needs to go to jail now, right now. Okay. I think the house is humidified. Once the last tank of like humidifier water goes through, I think I'm gonna be done with it. I do look like all dressed up. I might change this up for a t-shirt. It's a pretty dressy shirt. Okay. Please get these men into custody already. Please, please, please. Oh, please get these men into custody already. Please. It's humidified enough in here. It's so nice though. It's so dry. Yeah, so dry. Things evaporate really quickly too. It's amazing. Like I'll use my mom will send me a gift card or something to Bath and Body Works, and like normally defrosted coconut snowball lasts a long time. The body spray lasts a while, and I spray it all the time. Here, it's just like it evaporates.
November 21st, 1980, 7 o'clock in the morning. Inside, every year, millions of people walk through Central Park without knowing they're stepping on Berry Street. Beneath the manicured lawns and carefully designed landscapes lies a story that was deliberately hidden for over a century. This is not just a story of. Then I realized, when you say uninsurance is every good.
Like you're talking my love language.
Oh, I've been taking more classes online.
Oh,
Only pay for what you need.
This is still Domino's best deal ever. I mean, it's the only deal that gets you any Domino's pizzas with any toppings for just $9.99.
you did $20.
And save that 32 a
Oh, yeah.
This is the story of 1,600 people who lost their homes, their community, and their place in history so that New York's elite could have a playground. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're watching from. Let us know your city and country. Now, let us uncover the truth about America's most famous park. September 27, 1825, a young African-American man named Andrew Williams walked into the office of John and Elizabeth Whitehead, white farmers who owned cotton, inland farmland practices. Williams worked as a bootblack, shining shoes for a living, earning modest wages in a city that offered few opportunities to free black people. That day, he purchased 3 lots of land for $125, roughly $3,400 in today's currency. On the same day, Epiphany Davis, a Blackfeet store clerk, bought 12 lots for $578. The African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church purchased 6 more lots. These transactions marked the beginning of Seneca Village, the first community of free black property owners in New York City. The land they purchased was remote, nearly 5 miles north of the bustling city center, where most New Yorkers lived below 14th Street. The area above 59th Street was largely undeveloped, a semi-rural landscape of rocky outcroppings, swamps, small farms, and scattered settlements. It was difficult terrain, hard to farm, and challenging to build on, which made it affordable for working-class purchasers. Wealthy developers had little interest in such undesirable topography. But for free black people in 1825, affordability mattered less than something far more precious. What they were buying was freedom itself, autonomy, and the promise of a better future. 2 years later, in 1827, New York State would fully abolish slavery, completing a gradual emancipation process that had begun in 1799. But even free black people faced brutal, pervasive discrimination in the crowded, disease-ridden tenements of Lower Manhattan. Yellow fever and cholera epidemics killed thousands. Tuberculosis was endemic. Racial violence erupted regularly. Job opportunities were scarce and limited to the most menial labor. Housing was worse, with black families packed into the worst buildings in the worst neighborhoods. Seneca Village represented escape from all of that darkness and depression. By 1832, just 7 years after the first purchases, African Americans had acquired nearly half the lots in the area. The community grew organically as word spread through black churches, mutual aid societies, and poor networks. Here was a place where black families could own land, build permanent homes, raise children away from chaos and hatred downtown. The location between what would become 82nd and 89th Streets, west of 7th Avenue, offered something revolutionary for its time and place. It offered dignity, self-determination, and the possibility of building generational wealth. The name Seneca Village itself carries enduring mystery that historians have debated for decades. Some scholars believe it was named after the Roman philosopher Seneca the Younger, whose stoic writings on freedom, virtue, and human dignity appealed strongly to abolitionists and educated free black people. Others suggest it honored the Seneca Nation of the Iroquois Confederacy, though their territory was far from Manhattan and direct contact unlikely. A third theory, advanced by some recent scholars, points to Senegal in West Africa, ancestral homeland for some residents whose families may have preserved that connection across the terrible River Passage. The true origin remains unknown, lost to time and the destruction.
Come on,
What we know
get them into custody now.
is what they built on that rocky, hilly land over 3 decades. By the 1840s, Irish immigrants fleeing the devastating potato famine that killed over 1 million people and forced millions more to emigrate began settling in Seneca Village alongside the established black families. A smaller number of German immigrants, many fleeing the failed revolutions of 1848, arrived as well. By 1855, the community had reached its peak population of approximately 225 residents. Census records show roughly 2/3 are African American, 1/3 Irish, with a handful of German descent. This demographic mix made Seneca Village one of New York's most successful and unusual experiments in interracial, working class community at a time when the city and nation were deeply segregated by both law and custom. The physical landscape of Seneca Village completely defied the descriptions that would later be weaponized to justify its destruction. Over 50 homes dotted the unpaved streets and pathways. Most were 1 or 2 story wood frame structures built on stone foundations, with gardens, outbuildings, and evidence of permanent settlement. Archaeological excavations conducted by teams from Columbia University and the City University of New York in 2004, 2005, and 2011 uncovered physical evidence that completely contradicted the shantytown narrative promoted by 1850s newspapers and city officials. Researchers found quality building materials, carefully laid stone foundation walls, fine china, including expensive transfer print dishes and delicate teacups, glass bottles both plain and decorative, clay smoking pipes of various designs, personal items including a toothbrush and buttons, and most poignant, the leather sole of a child's shoe. These were not the hovels and shanties described in propaganda. These were homes built with care, skill, and the intention to last for generations. 3 churches formed the spiritual and organizational center of the village, providing not just religious services, but vital community functions, mutual aid, and political workers. The African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, known as AME Zion, had deep historical roots in the abolitionist movement and the fight for black freedom and equality. The denomination was officially established in Lower Manhattan in 1821 and maintained strong connections to the Underground Railroad and anti-slavery activists. The Seneca Village Congregation, known as the AME Zion Branch Militant from 1848, built a substantial church building in 1853. The church basement housed Colored School No. 3, where 75 black children received education at a time when most African Americans, particularly in the North, were systematically denied access to school. The African Union Church, another Methodist denomination, purchased lots in 1837 and served approximately 50 congregants, providing another spiritual home for the black community. Most remarkable and unusual for its era was All Angels Episcopal Church, founded in 1846 as an affiliate of the wealthy white St. Michael's Church, whose main campus was located at Amsterdam Avenue and 99th Street in the Bloomingdale district. All Angels was fully racially integrated, with black, Irish, and white congregants worshiping together, sharing communion, attending baptisms and weddings and funerals as one community. It was the only such integrated church in all of New York City during a period of rigid racial segregation. The church employed an Irish woman as a midwife who served all community members regardless of race. This integration was not perfect or without tensions, but it functioned, providing powerful evidence that different racial and ethnic groups could build common institutions when given the opportunity and freedom from elite interference. The village maintained 2 schools beyond AME Zion Church School and 3 cemeteries where generations of residents. Families cultivated extensive gardens where they grew vegetables including potatoes, cabbage, beans, and corn to supplement their diets and reduce dependence on expensive city markets. They raised chickens, pigs, goats, and other livestock. They fished in the nearby Hudson River, bringing home shad, bass, and other species. They drew fresh water from Tanner Spring, a natural water source that served the entire community. Census records show that over 75% of children living in Seneca Village attended school regularly, an extraordinarily high rate compared to the city overall where many working class children, especially immigrants and children of color, never attended school at all or attended only sporadically. Residents worked steady jobs in the growing city economy, domestic servants, cartmen who hauled goods, gardeners who maintained the estates of the wealthy, washerwomen who took in laundry, waiters who served in hotels and restaurants, and various service positions. These were working class people, not wealthy by any measure, but they were building stable, productive lives with dignity and purpose. They paid rent or mortgages, contributed to mutual aid societies, participated in church life, educated their children, and planned for the future. Property ownership statistics reveal just how exceptional and historically significant Seneca Village truly was. More than half of Black residents own their homes outright, holding legal deeds to property they had purchased with saved wages. This was 5 times higher than the property ownership rate of all New York City residents, regardless of race. In an era
No.
when Black Americans were
Please get these men into custody now.
build wealth through discriminatory lending, employment restrictions, and outright theft of land and labor. Seneca Village represented something almost unheard of outside of a few other communities like Weeksville. It represented not just shelter, but generational investment, a foundation of wealth and stability to pass to children and grandchildren. Property ownership meant far more than financial security or comfortable housing. Under New York State law created in 1821 and remaining in effect until after the Civil War, African American men could only vote if they owned at least $250 worth of property and had lived in the state for 3 years. White men faced no such property requirement, only residency. This discriminatory law was explicitly designed to limit Black political power while maintaining the appearance of fairness. In this context, property ownership in Seneca Village was citizenship itself. It was political power. It was the right to participate in democracy, to vote in elections, to have a voice in government. In 1845, of the approximately 100 Black New Yorkers who met the property requirement and were legally eligible to vote, 10 lived in Seneca Village, representing 10% of the entire Black voting population of New York City. Census data from 1850 and 1855 reveals something even more remarkable about the stability and permanence of Seneca Village. Every single Black family counted by census takers in Seneca Village in 1850 was still living there 5 years later, in 1855. 100% residential stability over a 5-year period. This was virtually unheard of in rapidly churning New York, where people moved constantly seeking better jobs, cheaper rent, or escape from landlords and creditors. By comparison, Boston's Black community, one of the most established in the North, saw 40% turnover in the same 5-year period. On average, Seneca Village residents have lived in the community for 20 years.
Please get these men into custody now and get them out of my house.
Nearly all have been present since 1850. Seneca Village residents stayed because they had built something worth staying for, something precious and rare, ordinary matters. Other residents likely used their basements and back rooms to shelter people escaping bondage. The village's remote location, far from the watchful eyes of slave catchers and federal marshals enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act, made it ideal for such dangerous and illegal care. Both AME Zion and African Union churches were deeply connected to the abolitionist movement and almost certainly involved in Underground Railroad activities. Beyond Seneca Village, other communities and settlements dotted the 700 acres that would be seized for Central Park. In the southeast corner of the future park lived 14 predominantly Irish families in an area mockingly called Pigtown because they raised hogs and goats for sale and consumption. These families had been pushed north from the streets in the 50s after wealthy residents of the area complained bitterly about the smell of livestock. 34 additional Irish families lived in a cluster between 68th and 72nd Streets, working as laborers, gardeners, and domestic servants. A settlement called Harsonville spread across the area from 66th to 81st Streets, though less is known about its composition. German families worked as skilled gardeners and farmers in the northern sections of Future Park, cultivating vegetables and flowers to sell. The convent of the Sisters of Charity operated near the southern boundary, providing education for girls and caring for orphans, many of whom were Irish immigrants who had lost parents to disease or accidents. The Academy of St. Vincent, an associated institution, offered more advanced education. Several bone boiling plants operated in the area, employing workers from Seneca Village and nearby settlements in the unpleasant but necessary work of processing animal bones into fertilizer and other products. Small farms, gardens, orchards producing apples and pears, and scattered individual dwellings completed the landscape. In total, approximately 1,600 people called this land home in the mid-1850s. They were not wealthy by any standard, Most were recent immigrants fleeing famine and political upheaval or descendants of formerly enslaved people still carrying the trauma of occupation. But they were building lives with purpose and meaning. They worked jobs that paid wages. They paid rent to landlords or mortgages to banks. They raised families, buried loved ones, attended church services, sent children to school, gathered with neighbors for celebrations and support during hard times. They had
Delicious, fluffy waffles. You can't wait to dig into.
Your confidence will continue to part of the long-term.
I could live here. I don't think I should be in. Where there's a vacation spot where you think, hey, I could live here. There's a window. Yeah. Where there's a window, there's a way.
This water called out the Venus Monster Icon foods. It has rich coffee with anomalies, balanced with both flavors and warm, sensual finish. Perfect to wear. So if you love luxury flavors but not all good prices, Legends.com should be your go-to.
They had routines, relationships, they had stability in an unstable world, a foothold in a city that often seemed hostile to their very existence. And then New York's elite decided they wanted a mark. By the 1840s, New York City was transforming at explosive, almost uncontrollable speed. The population had grown from approximately 97,000 in 1811 to well over 500,000 by 1850, with more arriving daily. Irish immigrants fled the potato famine that had devastated their homeland, packing into ships in conditions little better than the slave ships of their leaders. Germans fled the failed revolutions of 1848 that had promised democracy but delivered only repression. Formerly enslaved people from the South sought freedom and opportunity in northern cities, only to find discrimination and limited opportunity. All of them crowded into the narrow streets and teeming tenements of lower Manhattan, where living conditions were among the worst in the Western world. Cholera epidemics killed thousands in 1832, 1849, and 1854. Tuberculosis was endemic, spread by overcrowding and malnutrition. The 5-point slum, immortalized in literature and later film, was notorious worldwide for violence, poverty, and despair. Fire was a constant threat in buildings packed with people and lit by candles and oil lamps. For New York's elite, the merchants, bankers, and landowners who controlled the city's economy and politics. This rapid transformation represented a profound crisis, not primarily a humanitarian crisis, though some genuinely worried about public health, not mainly a moral crisis, though some religious leaders preached about duty to the poor. The crisis was fundamentally aesthetic, economic, and about health. Commerce and industry were consuming Manhattan. Factories and warehouses, immigrant neighborhoods were pushing northward. Property values in elite areas fell threatened. The city's reputation suffered in comparison to the grand capitals of Europe that the wealthy had visited on their shores. New York was rich, but seemed crude, chaotic, uncivilized. William Cullen Bryant captured this elite anxiety perfectly in his influential 1844 editorial in the New York Evening Post. Bryant was no minor figure. He was one of America's most respected poets, a cultural authority, and the editor of the city's most prestigious newspaper. His words carried enormous weight with the educated and wealthy. He warned that commerce was devouring islandage by age. If the city wanted to rescue any land for health, recreation, and civilized leisure, they needed to act immediately before all of Manhattan was consumed by trade and industry and the homes of the poor. Bryant and other wealthy New Yorkers admired and envy the great royal parks of London and Paris, spaces that showcase national power, cultural refinement, and civilization. Hyde Park in London, the Bois de Boulogne, and Luxembourg Gardens in Paris. These are places where the elite could promenade, display wealth and taste, and experience nature without encountering the poor, except as carefully managed servants. American parks advocates wanted to prove that democratic Republican America could create public spaces to rival anything the monarchies of Europe offered. They spoke eloquently and often of parks as the lungs of the city, places where working people could escape disease, vice, and moral degradation, where they could breathe fresh air and encounter uplifting natural beauty. The reality beneath this democratic rhetoric was more complicated and far less known. The park movement was explicitly, but not always openly, about class control and racial segregation. The wealthy wanted a geographic buffer to stop the northward spread of immigrant neighborhoods and black communities. They wanted to preserve valuable land for their own use and enjoyment, creating zones of refinement surrounded by rising property values. They wanted a fashionable and safe public place where they and their families could mingle and promenade in proper attire, away from the unwashed masses they encountered daily and the increasingly heterogeneous city. Some advocate the state of these goals openly in private correspondence. Others cloak them in the language of public health and democratic access. In 1850, Andrew Jackson Downey, widely considered America's father of landscape architecture and a hugely influential tastemaker, returned from an extended tour of English parks and country estates. He took up the crusade for a New York park with missionaries. Writing in his widely read magazine, Horticulturist, Downey declared with characteristic bluntness that what New York called parks were not even apologies for the thing, merely small squares of paddocks suitable for grazing horses, but not for proper recreation or aesthetic experience. Downey demanded that New York create a true park of at least 500 acres, a space worthy of what he called the true owner of the park, the common person. By common person, Downey meant people like himself and freedom, wealthy merchants with country estates, bankers who appreciated landscape art, landowners with refined taste and education, people who had leisure time for afternoon strolls and carriage rides, people who owned fashionable clothes suitable for public display, people who could afford to take Sundays off for recreation rather than working 7 days to survive. The democratic vision was never intended to be genuinely inclusive, despite the soaring rhetoric that would later justify its place. The goal was to create a refined space that would elevate the city's reputation internationally and provide the elite with a beautiful amenity close to their homes. The first proposed location for this grand park was Jones's Wood, 160 acres of beautiful waterfront property on the Upper East Side along the East River between 66th and 75th Streets. Bryant endorsed it enthusiastically in his newspaper editorials. The site had many advantages: mature trees, river views, relatively flat terrain, easy to develop, accessibility from wealthy neighborhoods. The land seemed perfect for a park. There was just one insurmountable obstacle: wealthy families owned it. The Jones family and the Sherman brothers, established New York aristocracy with deep pockets and deep political connections, had no intention of selling their valuable riverside property for any price, certainly not for the price of the city was proposing. When the state legislature passed a bill in 1851 authorizing the acquisition of Jones's Wood through eminent domain, these powerful families immediately mobilized their considerable resources to fight back. They hired the most expensive lawyers in New York. They filed multiple lawsuits in state and federal courts. They called in political favors accumulated over generations of wealth and influence. They lobbied legislators. They published articles questioning the constitutionality of seizing property from private citizens. Within months, a sympathetic judge declared the proposed acquisition unconstitutional, ruling that eminent domain could not be used in this case. The transaction was invalidated. The Joneses would part plan die. When rich people own the land, apparently, it could not be taken. Their property rights were sacred, protected by law, defended by courts, backed by political power. So the park advocates found different land. 778 acres of rocky, swampy, difficult terrain between 59 and 106th Streets, from 5th Avenue to 8th Avenue. The land was already partially designated as the Central Reservation, a potential site for a second reservoir to expand the Croton Aqueduct water system that had brought clean water to Manhattan starting in 1842. The existing Croton Reservoir occupied 35 acres near 86th Street. The city owned some of the land. Private owners held the rest in relatively small parcels. Downey immediately loved the new proposal. 5 times larger than Jones's Wood. Space for true landscape design. Room for lakes, meadows, woodlands, promenades, all the elements of a proper English romantic park. Ryan agreed, writing editorials praising the central location and larger size. Other advocates joined chorus. The rocky terrain, they noted, would not appeal to wealthy developers looking for buildable lots. The swamps could be drained and transformed into a picturesque place. The land was far from the city center, where real estate prices were low. It seemed to be short cheap. There was just one complication. Not a legal complication from their view. Not a political obstacle like the powerful families who had lost their land. Just people, approximately 1,600 living there. Building lives there. But these are the wrong kind of people. Irish immigrants, German laborers, Black families, people without power, political connections, expensive lawyers, or newspaper editors to defend their interests. People who could be removed through legal process and police force. People who could be erased from memory and history. On July 21st, 1853, the New York State Legislature passed the Central Park Act with little debate or opposition. The law authorized the city of New York to seize 778 acres of land for eminent domain, the government's constitutional power to take private property for public use with payment of just compensation. This power came from the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, which states that private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. The legal theory was straightforward and well established. The government needs land for important public purposes like roads, parks, military bases, and public buildings. Individual property rights must sometimes yield to collective needs, but property owners must be compensated fairly for what is taken. The critical questions, of course, are what counts as just compensation and who decides? Who assesses property values? What factors are considered? How can valuations be challenged? What rights do renters have when their homes are seized? The answers to these questions in 1850s New York all favored the powerful and property while devastating the poor and powerless. Mayor Fernando would champion the park project with enthusiasm bordering on obsession. It was a complicated
Can your pad absorb everything and stay fresh? Always Flexible can. It's the only pad made with a flexible foam core that locks in blood and sweat while the top stays dry, keeping you up to 100% leak and odor-free. See what foam can do for you.
Once you pop, you might find your flock.
Here are 3 things to consider before applying for your next credit card. Number 1, your lifestyle. You fly a lot, spend a lot at restaurants, look for cards with rewards and benefits that match your spending. Number 2, do you have high interest debt? If you do, think about a 0% intro APR card that can help you make progress while saving on interest. Number 3, the most important thing to figure out is which cards are more likely to get approved for. To do this, go to Credit Karma and they'll show you your approval odds before you apply. Credit Karma makes the process of finding a credit card easy in the market. Thanks to Credit Karma for sponsoring this video. Check out Credit Karma to find that new card now.
controversial figure, sympathetic to Southern slaveholders and opposed to abolition, corrupt and implicated in various schemes, but also ambitious for New York's growth and growth. He vetoed several proposals to downsize the park, insisting on a full 778 acres. He had grand visions for transforming New York into a world-class city, rivaling London and Paris. He also had profound, barely concealed contempt for the working-class immigrants and Black residents who stood in the way of his vision. In official statements and newspaper interviews, would repeatedly describe the future Parkside as an almost uninhabited part of the island, a wasteland of rock and swamp with minimal population. Almost uninhabited, 1,600 people, more than 200 in Seneca Village alone, families who had lived there for decades, communities with churches and schools. Almost uninhabited, the language was not accidental. It was deliberate erasure, preparing the ground for displacement by pretending the people barely existed. A board of land commissioners was appointed by the state to conduct property assessments across the designated park area. The board consisted of political appointees, men loyal to the party and power and sympathetic to the park project. They surveyed over 34,000 individual lots within and near the park boundaries, a massive bureaucratic effort. The assessments were completed by July 1855. The commissioners valued land and facilities, assigned compensation amounts, and created a legal framework procedure. The park project costs spiraled almost immediately. Initial advocates had claimed the land would cost perhaps $1.7 million. A substantial the final cost of land acquisition alone reached $7.39 million, equivalent to approximately $249 million in 2024 currency. This was more than the United States would pay to purchase the entire Alaska Territory from Russia 12 years later in 1867. The massive cost overrun became a political scandal and source of ongoing controversy. But the park project proceeded regardless. Property owners were compensated at values determined by commissioners, with minimal opportunity for appeal or challenge. On average, landowners received approximately $700 per lot. Though amounts varied based on size, location, and improvements. Many residents immediately protested that these valuations were
Ugh, please catch the schizophrenic freaks in custody. Please, please, please.
Actual market value.
Please, already.
Even given the difficult terrain. Andrew Williams, that determined Boot Black, who had purchased the first Seneca Village lots 32 years earlier in 1825, was paid $2,335 for 3 lots and a house he built on. He had requested $3,500 as just compensation, a modest and reasonable request. Even when seizing his land and destroying the community he had helped found, the state refused to pay the amount he requested. They paid what they decided to pay, and he had no recourse. Renters received nothing whatsoever, not a penny of compensation, not a dollar for moving expenses, not assistance finding new houses, not even official acknowledgement that they had existed and been displaced. Approximately 40% of Seneca Village residents rented rather than owned their homes. Across the park site, hundreds of families rented from landlords. In the eyes of the law and the commissioners, renters had no compensable property interest. They were simply removed, erased from the official transaction as if they had never been there. Church leaders from AME Zion, African Union, and All Angels appealed to religious and moral principles, arguing that destroying thriving communities and scattering congregations was unjust and ungodly. Teachers from Colored School Number 3 and the African Free School pointed out that their students were receiving quality education that would be disrupted or ended by displacement. Community leaders documented the social networks, mutual aid societies, and support systems that would be destroyed, leaving families vulnerable and isolated. One by one, every legal challenge failed. Courts ruled consistently and predictably in favor of the city and the park project. Judges found the Central Park Act constitutional, eminent domain properly exercised, compensation amounts within the government's broad discretion, and the public interest in creating a park sufficient to override individual property rights. Appeals were denied. Petitions were rejected. Administrative decisions were upheld. The legal system, controlled by and designed to serve the interests of property and power, functioned exactly as intended. It protected the Jones family and the Schermerhorns when they opposed displacement. It facilitated the removal of Seneca Village residents and other working class communities where elites wanted their land. The city also employed more coercive and underhanded tactics beyond straightforward legal process. Officials began strictly enforcing obscure regulations and ordinances that had long been ignored, targeting residents of the future park area with fines and penalties. They demanded that Seneca Village homeowners who had paid off mortgages decades ago now pay rent to the city as if they were already dispossessed. They sent building inspectors to cite minor code violations and threatened demolition. They used every bureaucratic tool available to make continued residence difficult, expensive, and precarious. In the summer of 1856, after 2 years of legal battles and community resistance had failed to stop or even slow the project, Mayor Fernando had sent final notices to all residents within the designated park boundaries. The message was clear and brief. You have until October 1st, 1857 to vacate your property. Remove all your possessions. Abandon the homes you built, the churches where you worship, the schools where your children learn, the cemeteries where your parents are buried. The city will pay the compensation the commissioners determine, which you cannot effectively challenge. If you're a renter, you receive nothing. You have approximately 14 months. Get out. Imagine the shock, grief, and rage of receiving such a notice. You own your home. You have the deed, legal and proper, purchased with wages saved over years of hard labor. You have paid taxes on that property. You have invested in improvements, building additions, repairing the roof, constructing outbuildings. Your children were born in that house. You know every neighbor on your street. You walk to church on Sunday and see familiar faces. Your parents are buried in the cemetery on the hill. This is not just property. This is home, community, history, identity, the foundation for your children's future. And the government says it is taking all of that, not because you have done anything wrong, not because you have failed to pay debts or taxes, not because the property is needed for immediate emergency use, but because wealthy people want a park and your home happens to be within one building. And there is nothing you can do to stop it. The law is against you. The courts are against you. The newspapers are against you. Power is against you. October 1st, 1857, a date that should live in infamy, but has instead been largely forgotten. A newspaper account from that day reported with barely concealed satisfaction that city officials had successfully removed the last holdouts still living on land designated for Central Park. The article continued with language that reveals everything about how power viewed this mass displacement. Many a brilliant and stirring fight was had during the campaign. It noted, as if describing a military conquest or sporting event rather than destruction of homes and communities. But the supremacy of the law was upheld by the policemen's bludgeons. Policemen's bludgeons. Read that phrase again. The supremacy of law upheld by police clubs. They beat people out of their homes. They used physical violence against elderly residents, against families with children, against anyone who resisted or moved too slowly. And a newspaper, a supposedly respectable publication, celebrated this violence as a necessary enforcement of law and order. This was not an aberration or excess. This was the intended process, the approved method, the legal mechanism of displacement. By the end of October 1857, the land was cleared of people. 1,600 residents scattered across the city, and 225 of their names remain prominent in history. But when poor black families, Irish immigrants, and German laborers were forcibly displaced, they vanished from the official record almost completely. Historians have developed theories. Some Seneca Village residents likely relocated to other black communities like Sandy Ground on Staten Island or Weeksville in Brooklyn. Irish families probably moved to Five Points or Hell's Kitchen. German families may have gone to Klein-Deutschland on the Lower East Side. But these are educated guesses, not documented facts. But before the actual displacement could begin, city officials and park advocates needed to accomplish something crucial. They needed to convince the public that removing 1,600 people from their homes was not just legal and necessary, but actually righteous, progressive, an act of civic improvement benefiting everyone, including those displaced. They needed to dehumanize the residents, stripping them of dignity and legitimacy. They needed to transform working class homeowners and renters into squatters and vagrants, communities into slums, permanent settlements into temporary shanties. They needed propaganda. Newspapers across the city began publishing articles describing Seneca Village and the other Parkside communities in increasingly inflammatory terms. The settlements were called shanty towns. The residents were described as squatters, vagabonds, scoundrels, vermin. Articles portrayed them as wretched, debased, criminal, ignorant, foreign, dangerous. The New York Daily Times, precursor to today's New York Times, repeatedly used racial slurs in its coverage, referring to Seneca Village with hateful language that dehumanized black residents. Multiple newspapers published lurid, largely fabricated accounts of crime, vice, drunkenness, and moral degradation, supposedly rampant. Edward Rodolphus, appointed as the park's first chief engineer and commissioned to conduct an official survey of land and habitat, wrote a scathing report that became a key propaganda document justifying the case. Neely described the arrest of 5,000 squatters living on future parkland. People with very little knowledge of English language and with very little respect for law. He called the inhabitants stubborn insects that needed to be cleared away for progress. Veely's report was deliberate deception on multiple levels. He exaggerated the total population by 3 times, inflating 1,600 actual residents to 5,000 to make the problem seem worse and removal more. He emphasized foreignness and lack of English language skills to portray residents as un-American outsiders rather than working class neighborhoods. He implied pervasive criminality despite police and court records not supporting claims of higher crime rates in these areas compared to the rest of the city. He used language designed to strip residents of humanity, describing them as insects rather than people with homes, families, and legal property. This propaganda campaign was textbook dehumanization, a process that appears again and again throughout American history when powerful interests want to displace marginalized communities, make them seem dangerous, dirty, illegitimate.
No! Get these animals into custody and out of my house! All this disgusting white trash. That's a good recipe. Look at that. Homemade. I was like, yeah, it is. Look at that. That's a proper like a recipe. Creamy casserole. I'm gonna stop this and restart it because I'm just gonna leave the headsets on so they don't, because it blocks it if you are watching TV in the background and it can hear it.